issues revolving around Wally Lewis. Really sad news that he's been diagnosed with the early signs of CTE, which is chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Yep, I was wondering if you were going to say the full medical term there.
Yeah, and 63-year-old known as the King, in recognition of obviously the way, especially the way he dominated Origin crawls, has been seen by Dr. Rowena Mobbs. Might be a relation. I'll have to wait and see. Depends if I'm in the will or not. But worsening memory loss, and we obviously know Wally had issues with epilepsy and that, and just tell you what, it hits you every time when you hear these stories. The emotion around this, and thoughts go out to Wally on this, because played in such a tough era where medical science wasn't where it is, and it was a badge of honour to pull yourself back up by your bootstraps and get back into play, no matter what sort of hit you were taking.
Yeah, it's very sad. But what I took out of Wally's quotes was he wouldn't change it. Like rugby league gave him so much in his life, and I guess that's the question that when you talk about the game's doing as much as it can to try and limit concussion injuries, but there is always going to be this risk because it's a contact sport. But the game also provides everyone that ever plays it, whether you're a kid playing in the bush or you're Wally Lewis, it gives you a life that you wouldn't have otherwise. All the camaraderie and mateship and everything that goes with rugby league. That's, I love the way Wally just said, I wouldn't change it because, it's provided him the life that he had. And if you look back on his career, I grew up in an era where State of Origin was so big in the 1980s and Wally was the king. And but we never really, in those days, got to see him in New South Wales from a club perspective and how he dominated in the Queensland competition. We only really saw him at that rep level, which is a bit of a shame because, he was so dominant on the rep stage. And, you talk about the greatest players that ever played rugby league. Well, Wally's in if he's not the best, he's in the conversation for the best.
Oh, his battles with Brett Kenny at Origin level, amazing. And we only got to see him the back end of his career playing for the Broncos and then the Gold Coast. But just, what a performer. To your point, Crawls, what you said about he wouldn't change a thing. I think a lot of players would say that. But what has changed, I think, Fatima, I'm so glad it has, is. It's everyone's talking and thinking and the environment around head knocks now because, I know people say, it was just a whack across the chops, or it was just an open hand, it didn't affect, but, I think we've pivoted in the right direction for this now, so hopefully this, but I don't know how you're ever going to stop the whiplash effect. We ban the shoulder charge, but the whiplash effect from those heavy tackles is always going to be tough to totally limit out of the game.
Yeah, it is. And I think most players now understand the risk that there is with playing such a physical contact sport, but they also understand that the game is doing everything it can to minimise long-term injury, because that's what, things like CTE are, right? They don't happen in the moment. They're sort of cumulative and they happen over a long period of time. And, and I'm sure Wally isn't the first and won't be the last to say something like, I wouldn't change anything, but that doesn't mean that we as a game can't make sure that we're constantly making the right changes so this happens less and less.
And it's important that the game stays on top of this too, because occasionally, without naming clubs, you do see, you still see people that cop head knocks on the field and somehow they stay out there, and you're racking your brain wondering why. And I'll tell you, the other area where you do see a lot of head knocks that seem to go unnoticed is in New South Wales Cup.
Yeah.
If you watch any New South Wales Cup game, they don't seem to have the same protocols as the NRL does. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at, which is a different conversation. But you just have to be mindful that the attitude has changed, like you summed it up, mate, Wally did, sorry. It was a badge of honour in the old days to cop a knock and stay on the field. I remember watching Brett Crawley play a game one day. It may have even been a test match, and he'd been knocked out earlier in the game, and he came back and won man of the match. And my thinking at the time was, how brave are you?
Yeah.
Because that's how you were grown up to think.
Yep.
Yeah.
And but these days he wouldn't have finished that game.
No. And then he'd be subject to an 11-day stand down, and everyone's saying, "But he's fine." But yeah, you've got to take players' welfare, out of their hands somewhat sometimes because of that innate bravery, which is what
It's
it
a
is.
young man's mentality, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really, like you don't think of the consequences when you're 21, 22, 23. It's not until you get to that later years that you realise the damage that could have been done.